Okay.
Good morning. I'd like to call the meeting to order now and ask the Assistant Secretary to the Board to start by calling the roll.
Good morning, everyone. With your permission, Chair Fleury, I'll do the roll. Chair Fleury.
Here.
Chair Harris. Here. Thank you. If the regents could unmute your microphones so that the roll may continue, and then remute yourself as I call your name. Thank you. Regent Balducci.
Here.
Regent Budd.
Here.
Regent Cohen.
Here.
Regent Gray Kemp. Regent Howery.
Here.
Regent Jimenez.
I'm here.
Okay, thank you. Regent Ryan.
Here. Thank you.
Thank you. Regent Wright. Regent Santiago.
Here.
David Blitz.
Present.
Kalina Sasenka.
Here.
Commissioner Westby. Commissioner Gifford. Commissioner Lehman. Commissioner Cardona. And from CSCU staff, President Ojakian.
Present.
Alice Pritchard.
Present.
Jane Gates. Andy Kipp. Andy Cripp.
Present.
Ben Barnes.
Here.
Ernestine Weaver.
Here.
Thank you. Chair Fleury, you have a quorum. Roll is complete.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Let me call the meeting, having called the meeting to order, call for a motion to adopt the agenda.
So moved.
And who, excuse me, who was that?
This is Holly Howery.
Thank you.
Second, Naomi Cohn.
Thank you.
All right. Moved and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, we've adopted the agenda. Thank you. Let's now move to the opportunity to address the board. And I'll have a couple of comments on this from a going forward perspective in a moment. But has anyone submitted comments per the current protocol?
Chair Fleury, individuals who wish to address the board were requested to submit their communications via email no later than 24 hours prior to the start of the meeting to my email address here at helenep@ct.edu. To this time, and as the deadline 24 hours ago, there were no emails that were received to that email address. Therefore, we have no comments from the public.
All right, thank you. I'd like to welcome Regent Gray Kemp. Good to see you. And we saw Regent Balducci briefly, and then he ceased to grace us with his image, but we can hope for a return appearance. I want to take a moment to welcome the new voice you heard. Pamela Helene joins us in her new role as Assistant Secretary to the Board. Welcome, Pamela.
Thank you.
After Aaron's departure, which we were certainly sorry to see, we had a gap there in terms of attending to governance and the connection to the management team and staff. Dr. Pritchard, as the board knows, assumed the role of secretary to the board as part of her broader administrative responsibilities as chief of staff and chief operations officer for the system. We're grateful to you, Dr. Pritchard, for your outstanding commitment to our mission, to our work, and to our students, and pleased to have Pam join you in your role working with the board as part of the team here. Pam joins us from a very similar role at Cayuga Community College in Auburn, New York, where she served as executive assistant to the president of the college and secretary to the board. And she's been quite busy working with Dr. Pritchard on how to better achieve governance and commentary and feedback and input via the awkwardness of digital. And one of the first actions that they've been working out is a way to get back to live public comment. We look forward to implementing that soon. Thank you for that. And I will want to acknowledge that in addition to myself and others feeling that that's valuable, there has been advocacy that we heard at the last meeting or read at the last meeting via the written comments in this regard. We agree with those comments. So A, yes, the written comments get heard and can be acted upon, and B, we think live is better. So we'll move forward with that in the future in a way that will make sense and hopefully not drive everybody crazy from a technical perspective and a meeting management perspective. This is our first full meeting since President Ojekian announced his intent to retire. And I know I speak for all the regents when I say that we're very, very grateful for his strong, effective, and caring leadership of this system. He has stood up for students in all facets of his work. In particular, he's been just a outstanding advocate for students around issues of diversity and all the aspects of diversity. And we clearly are in a time when it turns out that that focus, which certainly has been a hallmark of Mark's career with us and prior, was dearly needed, appropriate, and I dare say probably has put our system in a somewhat better place than it might have been absent his contributions in that regard in the moment. So, that's clearly a signature that we'll continue to reflect on in the waning hours and months of his presidency. But there are others, which I think I enumerated and the governor and others have in the course of the announcement, ranging from, campus safety issues in terms of violence, in terms of sexual violence, in terms certainly of COVID, which is the crisis we'll hear about today, and while remaining focused on the needs of our students, our community, and our employers, attending to the best of our abilities within the very, very significant confinements we have to manage this system from a cost and operations perspective, to also attend to the future viability from a fiscal standpoint of the system. And we'll be talking about that increasingly challenging issue today as well. We've moved under President Ojekian's leadership proactively on all related curricular matters, academic matters, student support matters. But those things aren't getting easier, but they will remain no less our focus despite the circumstances surrounding us. So with that, just as a momentary and on the record acknowledgement that we weren't able to make because we hadn't had this setting, I want to just thank President Ojekian. The presidential transition for any board, including ours, is one of the most solemn duties of a governing body. And we will devote some of today's agenda to that very important topic. While President Ojekian is leaving sooner than we'd like him to, he actually is staying beyond the term during which he was contracted to. So I know you've read ahead and seen in the consent agenda a one-dimensional modification to his agreement, which is essentially to change the end date by a couple of months. There are zero other changes with regard to benefits, compensation, anything like that. But that was obviously necessary to get covered from an administrative perspective. So we'll be able to get that out of the way. In terms of the rest of the agenda, we're going to hear in some detail, as I indicated, from Central as a model of what we're and our campus leaders are doing from a COVID management perspective. Dr. Toro and her team, like every leadership team in the system, are taking on just a really extraordinarily challenging situation here, and we're interested in hearing what that looks like on the ground. So we look forward to that presentation. And President Rajakian and our CFO, Ben Barnes, will necessarily talk about the fiscal impacts of the COVID and related economic crisis, which are really also tremendously difficult for every organization that any of you work for, I'm sure, and certainly government and public higher education. And that's going to concern us a great deal in the months and likely years to come. There are some important Title IX matters regarding sexual conduct, and that will be addressed in the HR and Admin Committee. And I think there is an action item for us on that issue, which is very important as well. We will convene for an executive session at the end of the meeting. There will, of course, be no votes in that session. And just for anybody making plans for the balance of your day, all we will do at the end of that exec session is gavel out the larger meeting as a matter of process. There won't be any announcements, actions to discuss, because we don't take those kinds of actions in executive session. So with those sort of preamble remarks, I'll turn it over to President Rajakian for his report.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you very much for those kind remarks at the beginning of the meeting. I will have more to say about my tenure as the president of the system, probably at our last meeting of the year, but just wanted to acknowledge that this takes a team. This is not done in a vacuum. Leadership requires collaboration and participation, and we have a very strong team at the system office who have been with me as we have moved forward. So I'll have more to say on that in December. The start of the semester, I believe, has gone very well for our 17 institutions. And I want to start by thanking not only my team, but the teams on all of the campuses, the campus leaders, and the faculty and staff and the student leaders on the campuses, I think, who have made our beginning of the semester so far so good, so to speak. Our community colleges moved smoothly from their summer offerings to fall courses on ground. And they've been working very closely with their local departments of health when positive cases emerge. We always knew that there were going to be positive cases of COVID on our campuses, but how we handled those cases was going to be important if we were going to remain open and operational. And so to date, there have been only a handful of cases at the colleges. And in all of these cases, campuses were able to remain fully operational as contacts between those who tested positive and others has been minimal. At the universities, all of the students have finally moved in to the residence halls and are part of our weekly testing protocols. To date, we've had 13 residential students who have tested positive out of close to 2,000 tests that have been given, which is a positivity rate at the universities of less than 1%. 10 of the positive cases of residential students were at Central, one was Eastern, 2 at Southern, and there were 0 at Western, as Western has just reopened to students this week. We are monitoring these numbers closely with the state, and each institution is providing a dashboard with weekly and cumulative results. And we are also sharing those results in our weekly COVID update. This week, the state provided a 3-day pop-up testing opportunity for off-campus students, faculty, and staff as part of an effort to control a modest spike in cases in New Britain. Additional testing was conducted across the city by local public health, as well working with churches, food distribution sites, and other entities. And we should know by the end of the week the results of that testing, but we had a tremendous turnout. Approximately 600 people took advantage of the free testing site. And I want to thank President Toro and her team for getting that site up and running with the state so quickly. I also want to just reinforce the fact that we've been working very closely with the Department of Public Health and the governor's administration to monitor the virus and support our response. And once again, a special shout out to Commissioner Gifford and her team. They have not only been incredible partners, but have made themselves accessible and available at every turn in the road quickly, and have been able to work with us very successfully on our public health protocols. Our contact tracing leads for the universities have weekly hours with their local public health departments and the Department of Public Health. And our 17 system-wide COVID coordinators have a weekly call with all COVID coordinators from public and private institutions in Connecticut. And these calls have been extremely helpful in identifying problems and collective consistent solutions throughout the state. Our goal remains, and I just want to reiterate that our goal remains the health of our students, faculty, and staff, and everyone who works on our campuses. At the same time, we must ensure that students in our state get the highest quality educational opportunities that we can make available to them. We have had an incredible collaboration with all of our state universities on contact tracing and how they will deal with positive cases on their individual campuses. But I thought it would be helpful for the board to understand exactly what that means from a sort of nuts and bolts perspective. And so I've asked President Toro to be here today with her team, who has really done an incredible job in the contact tracing effort. And Dr. Toro will be joined by Sal Cinturino and George Claffey, who have a presentation to share that demonstrates the strategy they are employing at Central. So President Toro.
President Ojekin, and chair of the board and members of the Board of Regents, thank you for the opportunity to share with you the good work of my colleagues. Let me say that I am very proud of the system we have in place, but credit is due to two high achievers who are part of my team. I challenge them and they respond to the challenge. Those are the Chief Operations Officer, Sal Cinturino, and the Chief Information Officer. Sometimes they feel that I am asking too much, but they like that because that gives them the opportunity to do more. Let me just give you just a brief summary, and they are going to talk about the specifics. One of the things that kept us awake before we started designing the system was how we are going to be well informed about when and how we will have to close a building or when we have to shut down the university if that situation arises. And the conclusion was that we needed information accurate information, not only about what was going on within the university and the cases related to residential students, but we needed to also track what was going on with commuter students and faculty and staff. And they designed a system that allows us to do that. Let me also say that it's important. I want you to focus when they present on some aspects of what we are doing. The contact tracing, how we manage the isolation and quarantine buildings, but also how we respond in a timely manner when we know there is a positive case for, of one of our residential students. And finally, I have to make a comment about the apparently uptick of cases recently. I can say that from September the 10th to September the 16th, we have registered one commuter student who has tested positive. One. I think that is important because you read a lot of things in the news, or the news are talking about things. So this is data. In the last 3 days, we have seen 6 positive cases of residential students. Two pair of those were roommates. The other thing that is very important for you to keep in mind, I am blessed. I am blessed because of my opportunity to lead an institution like Central, but I am even more blessed because of the team I have. With that, I will leave Sal and George, who will talk about the details of our system. Sal, George, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Dr. Toro. Good morning, everyone. So George and I are really happy to be here this morning, and we put together basically an executive summary for the process that we've been utilizing at Central. And what we really want to focus on is what we consider symptom tracking, contact tracing, how we handle quarantine, isolation, and the reporting process as a whole. And let me first start by saying, and you may be surprised, that we have actually a team with over 30 people that are working on this on a regular basis, daily. And so it was a large effort to put together such a team and to get them trained, but it's been really successful for us. And from the moment that these trackers get a positive result, the tracing begins, and the process starts with isolation. So students are transported to isolation. We have a building on campus, Sept North. At that building, they're provided daily meals, and we have medical staff there now too, so that they get medical checks. The tracing then continues on in the process after they have the positive person in isolation to identify if there's any positive contacts. And those individuals are then, once identified, they're transported to quarantine. Again, that's another residential hall that we have online right now for that purpose in Beecher Hall. Those individuals there, again, provided daily meals and have medical checks as well. And so that process has allowed us to swiftly identify and then relocate those individuals to mitigate the potential for spread. But we want to make sure that we make the point that the focus is larger than that. It was the larger community at whole. So our bigger picture starts with our residential students, and then it expands to our neighborhood directly surrounding the campus, and then it's the city as a whole. And the concept there was to make sure that we could identify these issues, and so that we could mitigate the possibility of the virus coming back onto the campus. To date, we've had 40 total commuters that we put into isolation and quarantine as of last week. The process that we utilized with the commuters was that we contacted them within hours of our notification. And part of what we've done is we've built the bridge in our discussions with the local DPH, our Department of Public Health. They've indicated that the partnership that we put together with them, communicating and being effective, that it's above the norm, above what they expected it to be. And so that communication, once again, and the timeliness of it allows us to identify swiftly and quickly, and even talk to our off-campus students and explain to them about self-quarantining off campus or going into isolation. That methodology that we put together and how it's worked and the layers that we've put together that I'm going to have George talk to you about has not only given us an effective plan and strategy, but something that creates reassurance at different layers so that we can be clear about what we're doing. And what I'd like to do to put it in more clarity, I'm going to ask George this time. We have some detailed slides. We'll start with those and go through those and then give you the closing results of it. George?
Great. Yep. Thank you, Sal. So we'll talk, I think we've got about 7 slides here, so we'll walk you through that. So we talk a lot about layers and about a 360-degree sort of reporting foundation. So if we look at the bottom of this pyramid, this is really the foundation of our strategy. This is daily symptom tracking. So every day, all faculty, staff, students receive an email to fill out our COVID symptom tracker. 2 basic questions. Do you have any symptoms? And here's the list of those. And have you been exposed to someone who could be considered COVID positive? And our goal is to have you fill that out before you leave your dorm room, before you leave your house, so that we're not bringing, any potential COVID exposed people onto campus. And that's part of that. If you go up a layer, we've got our COVID hotline. That's a 24/7 all incidents number. We use our student center and they're doing great. That first week, they took over 800 calls, and then that's backstopped when that closes to our CCSU dispatch. And we recognize that people can receive COVID test results any time of day. You can log on to a portal and see if you got tested during that day and you want to see at 2 o'clock in the morning, you check in, you find out maybe you're COVID positive. You don't know what to do. You can call that hotline number. And that's why it's important to us to have that 24/7 resource. That rolls up into 2 dedicated teams, one for student contact tracing, and we're going to dive into that in a second, and one for human resource contact tracing. And we track anybody who comes on campus. So we talked about faculty, staff, students. If you refill sodas at the Pepsi machine on campus, you're going through that same process. We call that vendor screening. And at the same time, we use Core CT to report time cards. Those come in every 2 weeks. If someone calls out sick, they're also reporting that to the human resource tracking. Because if you're taking a sick day, you're not going to fill out the daily symptom tracker because you won't be on campus. And so our goal is to always try to talk to you and see what your symptoms are the day that you report them. At that second to top layer, that's our Griffin Hospital tests. Those are the partnership that we've had with Griffin to do the 25% testing of students and athletes and the folks that are on our campus. And then at the top level, we have the self-reported COVID tests. And so we initially said, these aren't tests that we ordered. We're not sure of these, but we look at this is data that's early indicator data. It's self-reported data, but it's very effective for us to start working on that data just as soon as we see it. So that is sort of our layered approach. And in the next slide, you'll see how that creates what we call sort of our early warning system. So when you look at this, most people are focusing on that center of the bullseye or the radar screen. Those are residential students in isolation. That's what Sal was just talking about. And those are students that have COVID and we're managing their care and we're talking to them. We're nurses doing rounds. And then if you go out one layer, we're looking at residential quarantine students. These are students that have been exposed to someone who may have COVID or they have symptoms and they're awaiting. And those are the first 2 and the most important rings, but we take that a step further. We look at in-room quarantine. So those are people who on the symptom tracker identified that they weren't feeling good. And we tell them, hey, we would prefer if you just stop. If you're in your dorm room and you filled out that symptom tracker and said, gee, I have a fever, I've got a slight cough, I've got a scratchy throat, we immediately engage with our contact tracing team and say, you know what, we would prefer if you just stay in place. We'll facilitate an email to your faculty, one of your professors, let them know you're not going to be in class or you can attend that class completely online. And we're going to set you up with a telehealth appointment with health services. So they can do that from their computer or their laptop. But in addition, in every residential dorm on campus, we have built a specific telehealth room. So if a student says, gee, my roommate's with me and I'm not comfortable having that conversation, there's a dedicated room in each and every single dorm where they can go down. There's a camera, there's a monitor, and they can connect with university health services. On the outside ring of this, we look at commuter self-reported positive. Those are students that say, hey, I went to a Minute Clinic, I went to CVS, I went somewhere else, and and I got a test and I want to let you know that I'm not going to come to campus. And we treat that very seriously. We get student affairs involved, and they send them a note and say, you know, you're not to return to campus until you've been cleared by a medical professional. Here is our protocol. And then we're tracking close contacts for both. And it's important for us, you know, a lot of contact tracing, it's part detective work, there's a lot of big data. And a lot of it is asking about your memory. Who were you next to? What were you doing? So even when you're on one of these rings, we want to begin collecting some of that analytical data right away when it's fresh in your mind. We can go to the next slide. Awesome. So one of the things that we're doing is we call this geofencing. So if you dropped a pin in the middle of CCSU and you drew a 2-mile circle, you would find about 800 commuter students that are coming to CCSU in some capacity in an on-ground high flex seat. They're coming to the bookstore. They might be having meals on campus. And so we really wanted to make sure, in concert with the Department of Public Health, we were specifically talking to these students. And we've done some great things. We're tracking everyone, see what clubs are you a member of, what sports teams are you a member of, so that if there's an outbreak or a trend with one of those teams, we can begin tracking it. We're talking to people about unmasked community spread. So you might live with a roommate and it's perfectly acceptable for both of you to not have a mask on. And what are the things that you can do to help prevent COVID when you're in there, the cleaning protocols and things like that. There was a door knock campaign. So a number of campus constituents, ranging from athletic coaches up through the VP of Student Affairs, were out knocking on neighborhood doors, letting community members know, if you see something, here's the number to call. And then, you know, in concert with our campus police department and New Britain Police Department, we've got the party patrol, where we're going out for these reports of small gatherings on campus, and we're seeing if those are our students and talking to them about what the appropriate protocols are. On the back end, we're sending emails out of the student conduct office, letting people know, you know, what is the campus student code of conduct, and then also direct emails from the vice president of student affairs, letting them know the consequences of these actions if they continue and they go unchecked. So as we look at the next slide, and this may be a little bit hard, and we've anonymized this, but I'll try to walk you through a little bit of what this data looks like, because it may have felt a little amorphous right now. We anonymize this first top red circle. This is Bruce Wayne, and Bruce Wayne, we can see that he's awaiting a test. We can see that he's got some symptoms. He's got muscle aches. He's got a shortness of breath. He's got a cough. And we learned about that through the symptom tracker. And so we contacted him with our contact tracing staff. And in there, he identified 6 people that he had contact with over that weekend. And we say, great, let's collect their names. We're not going to do anything just yet because nothing's happened with Bruce, but we want to begin collecting those names and begin seeing if those groups have any affiliations. And here we can see that 2 of those people are football players and 3 of those people are soccer players. And so we're beginning to look at this and say, okay, we've got this. And now as we begin, this other name comes up, and this is Scott Lang. And Scott says to us, gee, I'm actually, I was rooming with Bruce Wayne. And we see that Scott is a residential student. He lives on campus, and Bruce Wayne is a commuter in New Britain. And so we can't quite connect those. So we call Scott with the contact tracers and we say, gee, why did you list him as a roommate? And he says, well, campus didn't open until Wednesday. And I came up on the Saturday, the weekend before, and I crashed on his couch for 5 days. So I guess we were roommates, but really I live in this dorm now. And that's part of what we're doing with contact tracing. It helps you appreciate when we look at this grid, and this is just a small snapshot, there's over 250 names, and we're tracing and tracking and watching and looking for relationships. And that's how contact tracing works, and that's how we try to spot trends before they become a bigger issue. We could go to the next slide. So some of the tools we put in a toolbox for our contact tracers, Banner is the student information system. And so that gives our contact tracers a quick report. It tells us, are they a commuter, who their roommates are, what their course schedule is, who are the other attendees in their class. We look at those affiliations like clubs and sports teams, but there are a lot of other systems on campus. We talk to coaches, we look at Instagram, we look at the campus photos, we look at that commuter student geofence. Even the swiping systems that we have. So every student who eats is going to have a swipe. Go to the library, you're going to swipe in. If you go to our rec center, you're going to swipe in. So a lot of contact tracing is us helping people remember where they are. And we're able to pull all that data into our contact tracers so that when they're having these conversations, they can try to, give some helping hands to someone who may be rationalizing that they've become COVID positive and they're working through some of those challenges. When we look at the contact tracing staff, and this was a group Sal and I spent a lot of time with over the summer, we felt really good going into the year. We had 10 individuals working between 12 and 15 hours a week, 2 nurse supervisors, a data czar, and that all backed into our existing medical director and health services staff. And so that was about a total of 200 hours a week or so, and we were doing that 5 days with on-call support on the weekends. I don't want to say we threw that out, but we significantly increased it between week 1 and week 2 as we realized how much more data was coming. And on week 2, we were at almost 400 hours. We've still got on-call work 7 days, but we've got full staff 7 days a week now. And we recognize that there are a lot more students that are going off campus, that are getting a test, and that we need to be able to collect that information all the time. So we've got 7 nurse supervisors, a data czar, in addition to the 3 health professionals and 1.5 medical staff that are part of that staff that's serving that. And so that allows us to make sure that if we have a contact tracer that's talking to you and you need a telehealth appointment, that we've got a telehealth appointment that day that we can get you into. And so it really does. It's almost 7 different teams, as Sal talked about earlier, a special group of people who's transporting you into the isolation or the quarantine dorm, people who are doing rounds within those dorms and adding those records into the medical thing. So right now, today, we're about 400 hours. So I think this is something that we wanted to talk about. Our partnership with DPH has been strong at a state level. Thanks to people like Dr. Pritchard, it's been strong at a local level with the university's relationship. And it's important. We've recognized that the students don't have a relationship with DPH, and they often want to tell us more information. And so we're working weekly and we're on call for each other's teams so that we can find out when a student tells a faculty member, I believe I've been exposed, that they can route that forward to us, that we can engage, and then where that is a local student or a commuter student, that we can relay that information into DPH. At the end of the day, we're all part of this team. We're one team and we have one goal. But the students are getting this data first, and sometimes 24 hours in front of DPH or in front of CCSU. And so as soon as we learn, we relay that to them. As soon as they learn, they're relaying that to us. We're managing activity in their system, which is called Contact CT, and we're uploading them copies of our information, which is in something called MEDICAT. So are there some delays? There are. I mean, COVID reporting is probably 24 hours, but I would say this is every week we see this significantly improving better and better, and those teams have really gelled to work together for the common cause, because the commuter students, they really are the responsibility of the local DPH. And so CCSU becomes assistive to them. And that's not always New Britain. It could be Newington, it could be Berlin, it could be Waterbury. And so it's not just New Britain DPH that we can liaison with. We can put this in the state of Connecticut system, and that's going to bring it out to where that commuter student resides. Sal?
Thanks, George. Part of what we put together when we talked about this and when the plan came to fruition was it was important to make sure that we also had data transparency and that we had the ability to meet every day. So every day at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, we meet to start gathering numbers, and then we meet again the next morning, and then numbers are posted so that people on the campus or anybody that's interested can take a look and see what's going on. And so that transparency for us, it just makes it important because we have a hotline, a 24/7 hotline. People can call in, they ask questions about people that have tested positive, if they may be someone that they were affiliated with. So the information is flowing on a regular basis. And we found that with our students, faculty, and staff, the ability to have that conversation and have it be open was extremely important. And as you can see, every single day, we're updating the numbers so they can take a look at that on the weekly basis, the cumulative basis, as you look at all the different slides that we have if you go to our dashboard. So it's been extremely effective. Next slide. And to put this together and to get closure to it and to appreciate what it's been, I mean, as George said, the concept from the beginning was to have layers. I mean, it's so important for us not just to assume that one thing is going to be the solution to the concern. And so we've created these layers so that it's coming from multiple levels, that the calls are made at multiple levels, that our contact tracing team, when they call something in, it actually gets deployed to different people so that we make sure that there's not only one person being called to pick up somebody and move them to isolation or quarantine, but there's a backup call that follows it up. That there's a call made to food services, that we make sure that they don't have any allergies to food, that there's a menu put in place for the individuals. They literally pick them up, drive them, transport them with their belongings to their new place. There's laundry that's done there. There's a change of laundry that's done at those places as well. So the tracking and the layers that we put in place for this to happen, like that's what we said. The number, when you talk about having over 30 plus people, it's necessary if we want this to work and to work well. As you look at the different groups, and as George was saying, the affiliations, and we've made sure that we reconnect it back. Every single day we're looking what dorm rooms, what residential halls, are there clusters being built. And so all that information is being gathered every day, disseminated amongst the group workers, and then the information is determined. You see, we talk about absence of information. We want to make sure that we're doing this in a timely fashion. One of the things that we learned after week 2 was that a couple of faculty members called in and said, hey, listen, I had a student that called and said that they had tested positive and they wouldn't be in class for 2 weeks. And initially we'd said thank you and we'd hung up the phone. What we realized after that is they wanted some feedback. And so we made sure that after we went through contact tracing and they did their telehealth, that we reached back out to the faculty members now when we say to them, listen, we appreciate the information that you provided us. And we've also closed the case and all the tracing has been completed. That just clarifies for not only the faculty member, but the other students that are in that class, that nobody in that class had been affected, right? That they weren't part of the contact identification. Because, if you look at the way that our classrooms are set up with the 6 feet of separation, everybody's wearing masks, we have the plexiglass, we've really created a safe environment. So it's exciting to us. The neighborhoods, we recognized early on, as George said, that we needed that relationship with them as well, because, we recognized that early on, some of our students, they were trying to find things to do and they were going off campus, right? They're going to different places. President Ojekian helped me with one of those places early on, as a matter of fact, that we had a concern with. But my point is, they were leaving campus as well. And so we wanted to make sure that we identified that surrounding area, that perimeter, and talk to those people. Our party patrols, every Thursday, Friday, and Saturday night, we have officers that are out and they're circling the community. Our neighborhood knock that George talked about just yesterday, our athletic director, 2 of our officers, and one of our student conduct, we knocked on every single door that we could in that 2-mile radius, and we've been doing it in chunks. They got about 20 plus groups that they talked with, but we're giving them flyers and handouts and information to explain to them about being safe. And, there's a difference between a party and a gathering. They say, well, geez, I had 10 people this weekend and we had a barbecue. But we talked to them about if they do have that barbecue, please still wear your mask. Make sure that you're using the 6 foot of social distancing. So that information is just to reinforce the safety plans that we're putting in place. And then we need to make sure that we're doing things on campus. So we're working with our residential life, making sure that we have student activities at nighttime, movie nights. We've even created, special areas of expression that we thought about in the summer. We didn't want students coming back onto campus with concerns that they had, right, about social injustice and other things, and then creating these groups that would come together and break down that whole safety protocol. So we've created spaces all over campus where up to 250 people can get together, but it's in a safe environment. So the plan has really been effective. You know, it's one that requires 24/7 work. I know that our sister schools are doing many of the same things that we're doing, but certainly, you know, the plan that President Toro put together through her leadership with George and I and all the people that are working on it, we're really excited about what's going on at Central, and it's going to be a successful semester. So we appreciate everybody's guidance with this.
Okay.
Oh, we're back.
Sorry about that. I'm learning.
It's all
Thank you very much for that. Very in-depth presentation and for your efforts on behalf of your campus. Just one other thing I wanted to report that had to do with reopening and COVID, and then would like to see if the regents had any questions that they would like to address on this specific area. Just a little bit of information on the spending that we have incurred as a result of COVID since it began. We have incurred about $45 million in total of expenses since, I would say, the beginning of March. As previously reported, about half of that was in room and board refunds that we gave out to students when we had to close campuses in March. And we have received so far a total of about $33 million in relief funds, mainly from federal sources through the state and a variety of funding mechanisms. So we continue to keep track of our expenses. We continue to put in reimbursement requests for expenses. We will have a much more, I think, detailed discussion of this when we go to the Finance Committee next month, and then to the board at the October meeting. But with that, I'd like to open it up to see if there's any questions the regents might have on our reopen efforts.
I do, Aviva, but I think it's fantastic what has been done for the residential component. I've always been concerned about the commuters, and I wondered if there is any real possibility of requiring commuters to get their tests and submit them on some kind of repeated basis as they come in to school. I only suggest this. I think it might be effective in stopping commuters from being casual about protecting themselves. The requirement that somebody is going to be checking, or they have to check themselves on some regular basis. I'm very concerned about the commuters bringing things into campus. And I know it's a huge job, though, but I'm curious to know how they have analyzed and at Central and thought about and decided what to do.
I'll answer that generally, Aviva, and then maybe ask Alice to sort of discuss the situation as a whole. But I think, as Commissioner Gifford indicated when she appeared at the last meeting, the public health protocol that the state is asking us to follow does not
I know that.
testing commuters, and that the resources we are using are best utilized to do the contact tracing protocols that I think you just heard from the representatives of Central. Now, I think all of the things that they described in their protocols in terms of their interactions with the local public health departments, their interactions with the neighborhood groups, their sort of party patrols, these are all meant to sort of mitigate the impact that commuter students might have. Alice, I know we brought this up before as part of our reopen discussions with not only our system, but with the other higher education institutions in the state. I didn't know if you wanted to sort of comment on that as well.
I guess I would just concur, and Commissioner Gifford's not on the line, but that has been their guidance, to treat them as if they are general members of the community as they do our faculty and staff. And so they have not encouraged that testing. I think some of the concern is that you'd need to test almost daily in order to get some of the results you'd be looking for. So they have expanded it when we have need to, as we did with this spike, and they will continue to adjust the strategy. They are not hard and fast. If they think it needs to change, they certainly do look at that. But they have not encouraged commuter testing at this time.
I know that, and I remember her presentation, and I had the same concern then, but since Connecticut has done so much testing and it's so available, I'm not suggesting that the system do the testing. I was just wondering if it might be a protocol that the individual commuter take on that responsibility. I know that testing in Connecticut is quite easy, and a lot of people get tested. I had to get tested for a surgery. It took 3 seconds, and they gave me results in a day's time. I just know that going back to a lot of schools, for example, in New York, students are required to present a negative test within the last 10 days. I mean, it just makes the students remember that they too are susceptible. I know exactly what was presented last time, because I'm very concerned about it. I know it's a cost and it's a huge issue, but I guess what you're saying is we've extended 2 miles, and if we have to extend 5 miles, that might be the next thing. Thank you.
May I make a couple of comments about
Sure.
commuter students? What the system office through Dr. Pritchard allow us to do this past weekend was to create a testing site. And that testing site, we strongly encourage every commuter student who wanted to be tested to be tested.
That's nice. That's good.
And we had over 700 people, including commuter students, additional residential students, faculty and staff who were tested. My understanding is we are going to do the same thing next week as well. And we will invite and strongly encourage commuter students again to be tested. The other piece that we are doing is the symptom tracking system. Every commuter student every morning receive an email from our CIO with a link to a 2-question questionnaire that if the person answers yes to any of those 2 questions, the person is not to come to campus and will receive a call immediately from our contact tracing team, and we will continue to follow up on those health conditions for that individual until the symptoms are gone. So that's a way in which we are working with commuter students, even though we cannot ask them to be tested. And the other thing we are doing is we are encouraging them, as soon as they get a positive test result, to let us know, and we continue to do that contact tracing and monitor the health condition of that individual, even when we are not testing or requiring those students to be tested. We have something in place.
I think that's terrific. I'm very happy to hear that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Aviva.
I do have a question. It's David Blitz. The symptom tracking, is that being done at other institutions in CSCU?
Yeah, it's my understanding that it is, Professor Blitz.
Thank you.
Okay, then I will then proceed to make a few other reports, and then we will end my report with a discussion of our financial situation. I figured I would save that for last, since it may lead to a robust conversation as my report ends. A little bit about enrollment, and we'll have more to say about this in October once we finalize our enrollment around the census date. But as of September 4th, the universities had experienced about a 5.5% decline in enrollment. The community colleges had experienced an 11% reduction in enrollment, and Charter Oak experienced a 4% increase in enrollment. Might have something to do with the fact that it's an online institution during a pandemic. We're still finalizing these numbers, and we'll have more to say about that in October. For the universities, the numbers are better than we had budgeted for, but at the colleges, they're lower than we had anticipated. There's probably a lot of reasons that enrollment has declined to that extent at our community colleges. But I will say that all of the campuses have worked tirelessly to make sure that they have reached out to every returning student, potential new student. They've worked in a regional configuration with Allison Buckley, who's our Vice President of Enrollment Management, to really make sure that they have expended every effort possible to get enrollment in a better place. That being said, we want to understand what happened during the enrollment exercise for the fall, so we're prepared for the spring. And with that in mind, we are convening a retreat. I believe September 25th is the date. We're anticipating a number of folks from the community colleges that will be participating in this retreat, along with folks at the system office. We will be really looking at a few areas specifically, because we want to understand what we did well, that we can then scale that best practice, but also where we fell short and how we need to improve those efforts. One of the questions we'll be looking at is, where did we see the decline in enrollment? Was it in new students? Was it in returning students? Was it in part-time students? Was it in full-time students? Was it higher at urban institutions as opposed to suburban and rural institutions? So we have to look at the whole demographic mix of our student population. What has been the success of offering remote services for students, and where can we make improvements? And what additional services do students need? And are we meeting the student demand for the different modalities that we're offering at our institutions? An important question I have put forward, and I think we need to address, because we have capacity limits on our on-ground classroom space, and that might translate into less sections of a popular course being offered. What more can we offer on ground? More general education courses, for example, more workforce courses. And because we have limits in our capacity, are we making the best use of nights and weekends to expand course offerings? I want the committee to take a look at that. And then what are we doing to strengthen faculty and staff training? what have been some success points and what do we need to do to improve that in the future. In terms of enrollment, I want to give you a brief update on PACT, which is our free community college initiative. As you remember, the board approved the system taking about $3 to $3.5 million from reserves to fund the program in the fall. Preliminary results indicate that about 3,147 students enrolled through the PACT program. Of that number, 31% of those students were determined to be full Pell eligible students. And so they did receive the $250 minimum grant that's part of the program. About 19% were partial Pell, and about 22% did not qualify for Pell at all and received the full grant amount. We are doing an analysis of what what that student population looked like, and we will have more for you over the next couple of months. I would like to say that we committed and the board voted to allow us to use reserves for the fall semester. We made it very clear that without state support, we would not be able to continue the program for the spring semester, which means that we would not be able to fund the students who are currently enrolled in the PACT program from the fall or open it up to new students. So we've made that very clear to the governor and his administration, as well as to the legislative leaders. And we're hoping for some resolution to the funding question before I think the middle of October is the ideal time. We would like to be able to remarket the program. So with that, I will ask Dr. Pritchard if she would just give a brief update on where we are with the CEO searches that we will be beginning this fall.
Thank you, President Ojeki. I'd be very happy to. And I just want to acknowledge, it seems we're having a video problem, but not an audio problem. So everybody can hear us, but not see us that well. So we'll keep working on that behind the scenes. So yes, we will be starting the searches for 5 campus CEOs. We're going to start them a little bit earlier than last year and finish them a little bit earlier than last year so that they don't completely overlap with the president's for CSEU search. So we have 5 campuses that will have CEO openings, and that is Asnuntuck, Naugatuck, Norwalk, Quinnebog, and Tunxus. And we will be following the same process we did in the spring to get the wonderful 5 that we have put in place so far. We will have 5 campus advisory committees with representatives from those campuses. We will have 5 regents who will be playing a liaison role to those campuses. And we will have a search committee. Those will be led by the regional presidents. And we look forward to getting those started. We'll be using a search firm who we've used in the past, both for the CEO searches and for the regional president searches, who have been incredibly helpful in getting us a strong pool of candidates to consider. So we will be sending out information to those 5 campuses either tomorrow or at the beginning of next week, getting them on board, getting them to pick their advisory committee members, and be meeting in mid to late October to hold our kickoff event. We will be doing the recruiting over the holiday period, and then in January, start looking at resumes, and February and March do semifinalist and finalist interviews, and have 5 candidates for the board, hopefully at the end of March. We don't yet know the board meeting schedule, but we're going to align as soon as we have that information. So we're looking forward to getting it kicked off.
Thank you, Dr. Pritchard. Just a few more highlights on efforts outside of COVID that we've been working on since we last reported last month. We've been working very closely with the Governor's Workforce Council to identify key goals for the upcoming legislative session, both programmatically and fiscally. And through our role as leaders on the Education Subcommittee, we've been able to focus on improvements in career advising, dual credit efforts in key industry areas, and increased focus on computer science and STEM education. These goals have metrics as well that are established in collaboration with our public K through 12 partners and public and private higher education, so we can all hold ourselves accountable. Our manufacturing strategic plan, we are finalizing an updated strategic plan for manufacturing, which has been developed in collaboration with the program coordinators and key external partners, and we're very excited about that effort moving forward. We recently received $763,000 in coronavirus relief fund to support non-credit programming for unemployed individuals. This is critical at this time in our state's efforts. My thanks to the community college chief regional workforce officers who worked very closely with Ben Barnes to take the lead on this funding opportunity. And then we also have offered a very unique program, really at the request of and working with one of our own regents, Joanne Ryan, in her other role as the president of the Northwest Region Chamber of Commerce. So Joanne, thank you for your efforts. And through that initiative, we are offering workshops that businesses can take advantage of on the subjects of teleworking and the new normal. And so we've been offering these workshops at Tunxus, at Asnuntuck, and at Northwestern, and they've been very successful. The demand is very high for these programs. And so, Joanne, I want to once again thank you for encouraging us to move this forward. In August, recognizing higher education's crucial role in the promotion of equity, not just within our institutions, but in society at large, and given the focus on racial justice in our country and in our state, we announced the formation of a CCSU criminal justice task force. There is perhaps no more obvious example of our persistent social inequities than within our system of criminal justice. And under the leadership of Provost Gates, the task force will make specific recommendations to advance criminal justice studies at our institutions and contribute to more equitable outcomes in our criminal justice system. The task force will be chaired by Dr. William Lugo of Eastern Connecticut State University and Dr. Tuesday Cooper of Manchester Community College, and will include CSU criminal justice scholars, community members, and law enforcement officials. And I want to give a special thanks to Regent Harris for her contributions in developing the structure and the charge of the task force. Your leadership on this issue has made this important initiative possible. So thank you very much, Merle, for your efforts in this area. And then finally, one last piece of good news. I always like to end on good news before we turn over to Ben and the budget. I'm happy to share that our system has been awarded a $350,000 grant from the Connecticut Health and Educational Facilities Authority, or CHEFA, to provide direct funding to undocumented students who were locked out from receiving CARES Act funding. Payments of approximately $200 per eligible student will be paid out next week at our community colleges. the universities are making these payments independently as well. This is an important lifeline for students who have been disproportionately impacted by COVID-19, but who were barred by the federal government from receiving most governmental assistance. And I also want to thank Ben for his efforts there as well. And I'm going to turn it over now to Ben to talk about our financial situation. We want to give the regents sort of a preview of where we are currently. We will be having a much more in-depth conversation about our budget at the next Finance Committee meeting, and then a full discussion at the next full board meeting. As you may recall, we did adopt a budget in July, and the thought was that we would always come back to the board in October with an update. And I think the plan that we will be reviewing in October will be different than the budget that was adopted in July. So with Ben, with that as a preview, Ben, could you take it from here?
Thank you very much, Mark. I'm going to go through these slides pretty quickly and move on to the next one, please, Alice. The update that I'm about to give you represents a snapshot from immediately before the census date. So the enrollment numbers and other things will change maybe a little bit when the final census numbers come out, but this is as current as is available today. The information that I'm providing you only reflects these revenue impacts. There's no, we don't have information on expenditures yet. That will be provided at the October meeting. And last, I want to point out that the purpose of presenting this information is to inform you of what's going on, but also to give the board an opportunity to provide any direction to us at the system office and at the individual campuses as we continue on with preparing budget revisions. Move on. These are sort of the top line highlights. Enrollment in residence hall occupancy trends are negative. They have been unfavorable to what we expected when the budget was adopted in June, based on reduced demand during the pandemic. As Mark pointed out, the understanding exactly how that reduced is a subject that we care very much about and are working to understand in more nuance and detail. The colleges and university revenues are on track to fall short of the budget numbers by about $43 million. Without action to reduce spending or increase revenues, this change alone would increase our losses for the current fiscal year to $91 million. As you recall, the budget that was adopted in June included a cumulative loss across the colleges and universities of $48 million. Further, there are continued risks. Further revenue losses from the pandemic are still there, particularly at the universities, which would suffer a revenue loss in the event that the dormitories need to close for public health reasons. I'll point out here that I'm not including Charter Oak in this analysis because Charter Oak is in certainly relatively, and I think in absolute terms, excellent shape in terms of their budget. And the trends that have impacted the colleges and universities have not impacted Charter Oak. So I've left them out as a mark of their good fortune today. Next slide. So this is the top line numbers. You can see the section on the left is our current year deficit as it was envisioned in the spending plan and as it's projected based on these new revenue changes that we are seeing today. As you can see, the losses of the universities we're thinking could rise from $33 million in the budget up as high as $56 million based on the revenue changes that we've seen up to date. Similarly, the community college deficit is going to rise by about $20 million to almost 35 million, simply based on the revenues that we've seen so far. And you can see the $91 million projected deficit. In terms of reserves, this could, if we don't take any action, and we will take some actions, produce declines in our reserves by about $40 million. Go to the next slide, please. Mark hit some of these highlights in his earlier remarks. Remember that the university enrollment drop of 5.5% is actually favorable. The budget had assumed a drop of 10%. So we have done better than we budgeted. However, the mix of individual students, in-state versus out-of-state and other things have mitigated. We picked up a little bit of revenue from that improved enrollment number at the university, but not enough to offset the very large drop in revenue from residence hall occupancy and meal plans. Overall, residence hall occupancy is down 30.5% compared to the assumed occupancy in the budget document. And recall that those was a little different at each university, but we were not budgeting for full occupancy of those residence halls. But even we've fallen short of our, I thought at the time, conservative projections for residence hall occupancy by about 30%. And this drop in revenue could, this drop in occupancy could contribute about $25 million to the drop in revenue. Enrollment, I put a couple of charts in here that I think are interesting. You can see this is about community college enrollment. On the line graph, the yellow line is headcount. The gray line is full-time equivalent. In either case, it's down in 2020. 2019 was not a particularly strong year either. We saw weakness in enrollment in 2019, and now we're seeing it in 2020. So this is fall enrollment. So 2020 refers to the current year. I put a little table in the bottom that points out that the weakness, this is not final because we haven't seen the census numbers yet, but the weakness in enrollment appears to be driven by part-time students. The FTE numbers for full-time enrolled students in the community colleges is almost level, which is great. But the part-time enrollment numbers are down nearly 20%. So that is at least an early indication of the types of challenges we face. We suspect that may be partly a result of the PACT program, which encouraged students to take a full-time credit load in order to be eligible for financial assistance under the PACT program. However, I do not discount that there may be other community and demand reactions to the COVID pandemic that are particularly keenly felt among students who would otherwise have attended part-time at our community colleges. Go to the next slide, please, Alice. So where do we go from here? The universities are preparing budget adjustments. Actually, they have been asked to provide those to us tomorrow for at least a first round of spending plan adjustments that they are going to, so that process is well underway. They are going to not only reflect the enrollment revenue trends, but to identify realistic spending adjustments and also ensure that the funds are in place to support hybrid instruction and the public health requirements. I think Sal's presentation from Central makes clear the level of effort and the variety of activities that are underway to meet the public health requirements that we face. The colleges are also preparing budget plans through the regional structure for the board to consider. You may recall that the budget that was adopted in June included a requirement for a 2% across the board cut at the colleges. So the details for that 2% have been developed already. And we are now working to identify further reductions that can be put in place to offset the revenue loss. You should note that the 2% cuts already included a number of elimination of vacant positions, cuts to other expenses and transfers. These are difficult cuts to achieve, and the colleges and universities, I'm sure will be successful at finding some reductions, are struggling to find, it's not easy to find reductions at the scale of the revenue drop-off that we've experienced. Next slide, please. Again, cuts are limited by collective bargaining agreements and the needs to serve our students and within the public health guidelines. I think that we are all familiar with those limitations. Students First does present several opportunities for savings that we are working to identify. We are trying to figure out how and what the potential savings from expediting some of the back office shared services, which were coming online this year. Obviously, some of those implementations have been delayed by the switch to remote work. It's much more difficult to reorganize when everybody is spread out as they have been, and also when everybody's attention is focused on reopening the campuses. However, we are rejoining that effort and are working to expedite that transition in a way that we believe will save some money in the current year, and certainly save more money in the following year. We're also looking at whether the planned phase-in of guided pathways and the Connecticut State Community College Administration can be adjusted to reflect our current budget realities and, frankly, our operating circumstances around COVID. But we are mindful of the fact that some things that we might do to achieve savings now for the current year may not be able to produce much savings right away, but we're still looking at those ideas because we are keenly aware that the budget for next year, for the year that starts next fall, in the fall of 21, we may well face continuing trouble and the need in any event to reestablish reserves. So we are certainly looking at ideas that will produce longer term savings and savings in the second year of implementation. Next slide, please. So that's a high level summary of where we are, and we look forward to providing you with more detailed plans, including a new proposed changes to the spending plans for both the colleges and universities in the October cycle. I'm happy to answer any questions, and I would welcome suggestions or guidance that you want to provide as to the types of changes you would like to see when in the coming board cycle. Alice, I hope I've met your timing expectations.
Thank you, Ben.
And now, Mr. Chairman, I think if we want to have a discussion of the budget, first, that's the last item on my report. And then if anybody has any questions on any other item I mentioned, I'm happy to engage after we discuss the budget.
Thank you, President Ojakian, and thank you, President Toro, and thanks for the team for the comprehensive overview of all these challenging circumstances. And, you know, certainly having for a while chaired the Finance Committee and observed with worry under much more normalized circumstances the structural challenges we had fiscally. It's really it's troubling to see what is emerging here from a financial perspective. You know, to me, and I think for everybody who is either leading, supporting, or in some way connected to an organization that's adjusting for COVID as a distinct challenge from overall trend business issues that had occupied us before all this, is to try to calibrate a response to something that one hopes has a duration to it, as distinct from a new condition that has, you know, an interminable timeline. And people are debating that all the time in boardrooms and analysis discussions, et cetera. And there are not a lot of answers, except that it does seem to be that we are looking at some level for a bridge here. So without being rosy-eyed about the longer term either. So I think for, you know, just generally, just from my perspective, and I know the other regents will have comment on this, it seems, given Ben's observation, and one that certainly resonates with me, and I know it will with the finance chair, of how difficult it is to achieve quick savings of scale in our setting, it seems that there will need to be a request for some kind of bridge support to get us through the coming months, year, perhaps 2 years. And that, we have to appreciate that that is not going to be an easy ask. And we have to have realistic expectations of what that's going to look like, which also, I think, leads to some policy questions, probably not just for our system, about what it means to run what on paper look like deficits that take you potentially in excess of your reserves. And again, on paper, raise the question of solvency. So those are, very, very serious questions, and I know you're thinking about them, and we'll be support in every way we can in working through them. But it seems like we really have to be looking for, on one level, financial support that can help us solve things that we managerially have no way to get at. And secondarily, to look at the things that we have no way to managerially address and ask whether there is some relief, some open-mindedness in terms of helping us have conversations that are off the table right now and are the assumptions upon which Ben bases the expense side of this picture, and continue to be really the crux of a structural problem that's only illuminated by this circumstance. So that sort of broad thoughts from my perspective and stating what is probably obvious to everyone here.
Mr. Chairman, I think those are really important thoughts, and I think, as Ben indicated, we are looking for sort of a general direction or issues that you would like us to consider as we prepare our budget modifications for the Finance Committee and for the full board. But I think the opening comments you just made, at least in my mind, gave me some sense of that direction, and you can be sure that we will consider those comments as we move forward. But it'd be very helpful to hear if any other board members have any specific directions they would like us to move toward.
Mr. Chair, I believe that Regent Balducci is having some technical issues, but I think he might be trying to comment. I can't quite tell.
Hey, Alice. Alice. I'm sorry. This is Ari. I don't know if it's me or not, but I cannot make out anything coming through on the audio.
Yeah, we've gone from hearing him well to seeing him well and not hearing him well.
You may want to just have him call in, Alice, and I can make a few comments if you'd like while he is attempting to.
Okay.
Thanks, David.
Rich, you guys do your thing.
Okay. So, Mr. Chairman, Matt, you referenced, I think in part, the financial overview we just received as troubling, and I do think it's troubling. It's clear that what was a pandemic crisis has evolved into a financial crisis, and as it is true, it's troubling. It's not really unusual. I know that organizations that I'm associated with, both not-for-profits as well as corporate clients, are facing similar circumstances and taking dramatic, responsible action. And I think that my quick answer to you, and then I'll be more granular to what I think Mark and Ben's questions are, is everything should be on the table. We've seen not-for-profits announce that they're closing their entire season in the city of Hartford. We saw in the paper yesterday that Raytheon announced job cuts in excess of 15,000. I know that the Hartford recently announced job cuts and incentives for retirements. And as I think about our labor negotiations that are in our near future, I think we're going to have to approach those with these realities in mind as we discuss our collective bargaining agreements. And for starters, I think we're going to have to really put aside any notion of wage increases and discuss the reality of the situation with our faculty and other unionized staff. We should be looking at retirement incentives and what are the milestones that are relevant to our personnel, and how do we incorporate that into our negotiations. We are, to some extent, a shrinking organization because of all of these factors, and we need to make sure that the workforce that we have in place and that we utilize is right-sized and not be held captive to prior models or prior years. We are in a new reality, and it's a remote reality, more so than I think it ever has been in the past. So I would propose that these negotiations that are in our near future be put at the top of our list. But I don't for one second believe that should be all. I think everything should be on the table, including tuition, including all of the expense items. In my view, the more realistic we are on that front, the greater the leverage we have to go to our legislators and request that they consider whether it's bridge funding or enhanced funding or what have you. We've got to come at this with a balanced perspective, that we are being realistic and being diligent about our expenses, and that gives us, in a sense, the ability to demand more from the state in terms of, how they fund our system. So I'll leave it at that. Mark, unless you have any follow-up questions, but I just think it's very important that Ben factor this into the budget planning process. What must we, unfortunately, incorporate into our upcoming labor negotiations?
I'd love to, David, if Matt or Mark, I don't know if I can I just jump in for a moment and just share a couple things? Yeah, so David, I'm with you on a lot of that. Seeing the same thing in the corporate world and in other nonprofit boards. I think, from my perspective, realizing that I'm new on the team here, I think the core thing is really to try and understand what is our core purpose. What are we trying to do? What are we trying to achieve? And to your point, David, I think look at everything top to bottom and make sure that we're putting our limited resources and maximizing our core value proposition to the community in Connecticut and what we're trying to build on, and we should let that be our guiding principle. And you didn't say it like this, but nothing's off the table, right? Everything should be looked at, and we gotta slim up and focus up on what our key roles and responsibilities are. And I support your concept of making this a top priority. We need to be accountable to making sure this great system is available and responsive to the students of this generation and in generations in the future. It's critical to the residents of Connecticut, our workforce, and the people that we serve. So I'm with you.
Can I chime in?
Yeah.
Yes, we can hear you.
Oh, great. Yes. This system over the last 4 or 5 years has gone through very, very difficult times. Now we're going through a time which is unprecedented in any way, shape, or form. I listened to Ben. We've had conversations over the last week as to what's going down. We have scenarios for the community colleges. Even at best, they're worse than the projected August budget projections. I think we'll make a proposal after we meet next month. But I think there's several things I'd like to throw out. David did his part, I think, in expressing several important points. I think we have to go to the state ask them for $90 million or whatever our shortfall will be. I think that's critical that they take part in this. The PAC dollars that we borrowed from our own reserves, over $3 million, needs to be replenished. There are many of the students who are out there, many of the candidates that are out there that are waving brochures around saying that, you know, we've got free college, and that's a great thing. Now they have to stand up and support that by coming up with the revenues for those students as we move forward. Potential problems with the reserves, Ben and I chatted about that. We could potentially be $3 to $4 million in the red as far as community college reserves go if things don't get better. And that's not being responsible. I think we're going to have to do something to help prevent that, so we're being following our fiduciary responsibility with them. And it may be that we have to borrow $3 or $4 million from the reserves of the universities. Not something I'm sure university presidents will like, but I think we ought to take a look at that. We're going to need to make cuts in the budget and somehow renegotiate, I think, with the unions at the college and university levels. And I mean real cuts. You know, colleges should be projecting or have been projecting a 2% cut already. I think we have to look at that to continue on in real cuts, and maybe also start projecting by the 1st of November, and we'll know better in the October meeting, even a 4% cut, and where those would come. And that is not going to be easy. I know, and I understand that, but I think we should put those on the table so that the board can look at them and decide what they're going to have to do in the very near future. This is not a positive situation, as I said before, but working together, hopefully we can reach our goal, which is to provide an outstanding education at a reasonable cost to our students, with safety being at the forefront of all of that. It's not easy. I think it's going to be something that has to be done. And if need be, I think the board will have to help make those cuts if they can't be made within the parameters of the colleges and universities as we move forward. Nothing I like to say, but I think it's something that we're going to have to look at if we're going to be successful in the future.
Thank you. Let me try to be of some value here in terms of facilitation. I see the Vice Chair and Dr. Blitz are unmuted. I'm assuming that means you both would like to make a comment. Dr. Harris, why don't you proceed, and Dr. Blitz will come to you after that. Is that all right?
Okay, I agree with most of what has been said already. I do feel that we need to go back to see if we can get additional funding. I know that's a very difficult ask right now because everyone is hurting. However, the first step should be to fund the PAC program for this year, because we made a commitment to students based on what we were asked to do. So I think it's really important that we have the funding for at least this year, so we don't disrupt student plans that are already enrolled for this semester, and what happens to them next semester. I think that's critical. It's not a huge amount of money considering what the total amount we need is, but that would be the first step. Secondly, I want, from the perspective of academic and student affairs, we already made a statement at our last meeting that we are not going to approve new programs unless it's clearly they are revenue positive and do not probably require hiring new faculty in the first or second year of the program. So we sent that message out, and we really are going to look very carefully at any new requests. The second area is program review. We have a process to look at existing programs that are in place, and we may need to ramp that up given the situation. We now look at a program, I believe, every 7 years. We may need to do a broader look, and I'm going to ask Provost Gates to look at that and to see if that is something we could do. It's worked. We've had a lot of program discontinuations because of that, but I think we have to really sharpen it because of the situation that we have now. So that's one thing. Another idea I just want to throw out, which is not going to save us money, but I think will help us to do a better job, is since we're doing so much online right now, we really need to ensure we're doing it with quality. I mean, it's going to become part of our existence for the rest of this year and I think into next year. And I would like to suggest, of course, I'm a little prejudiced, but that we look at Charter Oak and its resources to see if we can call upon the other institutions to use some of those so that we work on program design and improving our approach to learning so that it's not just a talking head, but we're really doing a better job. I think those are some of the things that I will contribute in some way to making the system better. There's just one other comment. I know we're not going to be able to do pathways initially like we had planned. However, it's really important that we have good guidance for students that are enrolling, and we need advisors to do that. I would like that to be something we look at as we cut things, how we can assure that entering students are getting the advice, because if we don't do that, we're going to have a terrible problem with dropouts or people coming back and saying, I took all the wrong courses because no one told me what to take. Even though it was free, it's a student's time. So I really urge everyone as we plan to plan for that as well.
If I could just follow up really quickly, because two regions spoke about the PAC program, and I just want to reiterate what I said earlier, is that the board was very clear when they allowed us to use the reserves to fund the fall, that we would not be able to fund the program beyond the fall. And we indicated that to the administration and to the legislative leaders. And so I just, we're going to be having continuing conversations with both the governor and his team, as well as the appropriations chairs and the leaders, about finding some way to fund it for the spring. And we have a couple of creative ways that we're working with them on. But, it's important for everybody to know that I think, to your point, Merle, we made a commitment. The legislature made a commitment to students when it enacted the PAC program. We kept that commitment to students because the legislature was not able to meet and actually debate the funding levels for the PAC program. So we were able to provide sort of a bridge for the fall semester. But I just want to be really clear, unless there's legislative work that provides additional funding, we will not be able to continue the PAC program into the spring.
Something else, and they don't know that. So I think we need to do whatever we can to make sure that that's understood.
Dr. Blitz?
Thank you. I look forward to a discussion that we're going to have in the Finance Committee, because I'm a member of that committee as well. But my question is to Ben Barnes, and the reference you made to speeding up back office consolidation of back office or back office shared resources. Is that being made in the context of the community colleges only, or is that also being extended to the universities? That's the first part of my question.
The back office consolidation that is currently underway impacts the colleges. There are some back office consolidation that impacts universities that's been in place for a long time and will continue that. I do not have any illusion that we could accomplish meaningful back office consolidation of the universities in the time frame that would impact the current year. So that's an open question. So we are looking to take consolidation of community college back office functions that was underway and to get it done more quickly and to realize more of its financial benefits more quickly. That's what I think.
Thank you. Because I just wanted to note that one of the paradoxical aspects of the health crisis that we're having now and the extreme situation that exists is that, especially for us at the universities, the expression "help is local" is even more important. And as we are more dependent on our IT services and our HR services and various other aspects of the support staff, which may be referred to as back office, I would prefer to refer to them as support staff, we see that that notion of help is local becomes more and more important. And that's also significant for retaining students so that we can correct problems in our high flex classes or in online services or in hiring of part-time and other faculty very quickly.
If I could just follow up to Ben's response, I think what Ben indicated was that what we are talking about specifically here deals with the colleges.
Yes.
But I would be sort of, I think, derelict in my responsibility if I didn't, say that there may be some services that we should look at together that wouldn't impact the sort of advising and support services that folks are offering on university campuses. Because I think what I'm hearing from Regents is that everything should be on the table. And so while I would be very much in favor of having a very robust conversation on what makes sense and what doesn't, I sort of agree with what the Regents said, that we should, put everything on the table and see where we come out.
Do other members of the board have comments or questions on this matter?
I do. This is Elise.
Hi, Elise.
Hi. No, but what I wanted to say, I just want to make a comment. When you're talking about consolidation of functions, of support functions or other functions, it doesn't necessarily mean fewer services or services are going to be far away. My experience is there's consistency in the policies and the practices and how those services are provided. And at least in my experience, oftentimes the services are more efficient. They're more responsive. And I don't know, it's not always the case, but if done correctly, that can be the case, so that you're looking for not only lower costs, but more effective and efficient services. And if you can achieve that by consolidating certain functions, I think it's something that we should do.
Anyone else?
Hi, good morning. It's Howard. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
So,
sorry. I just wanted to point out that it's an unprecedented time, right? But the positives that can come out of that is we can look at things in a completely different way in some of these areas than we have before. I mean, we're all talking to each other from our homes and broadcasting it on YouTube. 6 months ago, that was unimaginable, right? We would never do that. And yet we're all excited that we can see each other finally again, right? And so I think that there's a level of creativity that can come out of this where we can really look at things in a different way. And not just, we got to put a Band-Aid on this for 6 months. And then in 6 months go, oh my God, we need another Band-Aid for 6 months. We need another Band-Aid. We had a plan, we were heading in a direction, and this happened. And it's not anybody's fault, but I encourage us to not only consider everything, as David said and everyone else has said, but also to look at creative ways that can maximize the dollars we have and continue to provide services, right? We have to support the students, getting students educated is the point, right? So, let's not look at it as the worst thing ever and start looking at it as how can we turn this around and make some positive change out of this in ways that we wouldn't have thought to do it in the past because we didn't have to. And now we do. That's it.
Thank you. That's a welcome note. And I think it goes to the point that while there's a crisis to contend with, our challenge in mapping our approach is to not make knee-jerk reactions that we regret in the long term, because while I think it's fair to ask whether the COVID episode here is going to cause some measure of reset, some measure of shifting to platforms like this for conversations that we weren't comfortable having in platforms like this before, or programs or activities, there still will be a great value to some of the things, many and most of the things we have done traditionally in traditional ways. We just have to be very skillful about identifying, as Ari said, kind of those core goals and objectives and needs, and figuring out better ways to continue those while also dealing with the reality of, at least, when you say it's a durational condition. Again, our organization, and I know others, David Jimenez commented on this because he's involved both with corporate and with voluntarily nonprofit organizations, are trying to figure out what's the trajectory here. And literally conversations are, in the case of a nonprofit and our system here, how much is it responsible to utilize in terms of reserves, cushion, or debt? And still believe that on the other side of it, you'll be sustainable. And then how much road do you have before those options run out entirely? And the thing that, we really have to be straight up about is that, particularly in the case of the colleges, and the universities aren't that far behind, the road isn't that long before you have to ask where you go after that. So thank you for the very thoughtful input, and I know there'll be a great deal of conversation about this. I think for Mark and the team, I'm sure they've been taking some notes. The things that I heard emerge here is clearly we have an exceptionally strong and important case to make to the state of Connecticut for the importance of this system, and for the commitment that we have to sustain to the students and the communities we serve. And nobody has been more forceful in advocating that than President Ojakian. He, I know, to the last moments and beyond, will be that voice. This board will need to be that voice. The members of the faculty and the staff will need to be that voice. There is an investment side of this that's going to have to be made to get us through this, whether it's for PACT or, as Ben's numbers would suggest, well over and above PACT. At the same time, clearly, we'll have to look, and it'll be demanded, rightfully so, that we continue to look at how we operate, to find ways to bring solutions to the table within the system and the way we manage it, the way it is run. And those are the hardest, let's face it, the hardest parts of the conversation on this group and among all of the people we care about within the system and served by the system. When you talk about workforce, when you talk about program, you're talking about the hardest conversations. And to Regent Howery's point that, great innovations are accelerated in times like this, it is true. And as some of us have been through long-standing innovations of this very system, including Charter Oak State College, of which I was part, there are great ways to do online education, and with abundant appreciation for Dr. Blitz, Dr. Sasenker, and all of the faculty who have made a light years astonishing shift by necessity to using platforms like this to teach classes with quality that I think we all can be very, very proud of. The reality is they've had to take a traditional program and shift it very quickly to an entirely new platform, which is different than designing soup to nuts the way Charter Oak did, a different way of doing education. And I'd be the first to say that the traditional format the college campus experience that so many of our students value and for which so many of us work is not going to go away. But there may be a balancing and a rebalancing there, for which Charter Oak actually offers us some really interesting and useful insights going forward that I think a lot of systems probably don't have the benefit of. So let's not squander the value of that. So there's much work to do, and I think what we as a board need to ask for, and I know that President Ojakian is already at work on this, but we need to essentially give our endorsement to the idea that we have to look at all of those things and to ask the administration to come, back to us in a reasonably short time frame, probably October, to at least say, of the things we've discussed here, where can we make some progress? What are the things worth going after? And to be bold and recognize that they're not all going to be popular and perhaps not all viable. And to certainly commence, to the extent that you haven't, the conversations about what we're headed for here with those who have something to say about our budgets from government. Is that a fair framing of next steps from your perspective, President Ojakian?
Yes, it is, Mr. Chairman. I think we need to develop and present both a short-term, strategy for getting through this current fiscal year, but then also some steps we will want the board to consider as a longer-term approach to reimagining how we educate our students in the future. But that's a fair assessment. Thank you for that.
All right, thank you. And for the steep climb between now and the October meeting, I apologize to the team who I know are already working really hard, but we look forward to hearing an update at that point in time. And I know that Chairman Balducci and the Finance Committee are, certainly ready from a board standpoint to engage.
Thank you. We'll be ready.
All right. Well, thank you, President Ojakian, for your report, and to everyone involved in the good work. And thank you also for the, the extra effort that's been necessitated by these circumstances and will be going forward. Let's dispense with a couple of items here. First, we have 2 minuted meetings for which the minutes need to be formally adopted. So I'd like to request a motion to approve the June 18 and July 29, 2020 meeting minutes.
Naomi, so moved.
Second, Elise.
Thank you, Naomi and Elise. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, so the minutes are approved. On the consent agenda, may I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
And a second?
Second, Regent Howard.
Thank you. Any discussion? All in favor on the consent agenda?
Aye.
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 Any opposed or abstaining? Thank you. The consent agenda is approved. The standing committee reports, I think we'll go right to the chairs. If my notes are wrong and you have something to say about academic student affairs, audit, or finance over and above what's been said, let me know. Not seeing any indications thereof, let's go to the HR and Admin Committee. Chairman Cohen has led the discussion there on all matters and has a couple of important ones for us today.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. On behalf of the HR and Admin Committee, we seek your approval of a resolution that begins on page 111 with the staff report. This resolution establishes the board policy for the search and appointment process for a CCSU system president. Here are the key points of the policy. 1, it's based on other board policies for searches of institution presidents, regional presidents, and CEOs for our community colleges. 2, it creates 2 committees, a board search committee and an advisory search committee. The membership of both committees are described in the report. Suffice it to say that for the advisory committee, the committee itself will choose its members, and for the board committee, they will be appointed by the chair. Both committees are going to participate, as they have in the past, in developing a position profile, reviewing resumes, participating in semifinalist and finalist selection and the interview process. Other key things to know that the board statutorily has the responsibility to govern the system and select the system president to be its chief executive officer, and the board shall vote on the candidate following the same process it always has. As in other searches, this will be a national search, and a search consultant may assist in our search. We'll follow all the affirmative action policies of the board. They're a foundation of our search commitments to a diverse applicant pool. External stakeholders will also serve on the search advisory committee. And I would close by saying that this process has worked successfully in many other searches. We've hired at least 3 university presidents, 3 regional presidents, 2 community college presidents, and 5 CEOs in my time on the board, all under the search process. And we have received positive feedback from participants at all levels. So that said, I would like to move adoption of the resolution.
I'll leave room for discussion here, but is there a second?
Second, please.
Thank you. It's moved and seconded. And are there anyone who would like to comment?
In the absence of anybody else, if I may make a point, I sent a list of 5 questions to Regent Cohen, and I appreciate her responses to them. I'll bring that to the attention of the Faculty Advisory Committee. However, there is one issue that I want to bring up to the board, and that is on page 112. And the number of faculty and professional slash support staff who are going to serve on the advisory committee. In the case of the community colleges, the number is 3, and that makes sense because of the 3 regions. And I understand, and that's put in brackets as the justification. However, when we look at the representation for the universities, the number is 3 again. However, there are 4 universities. And it seems to me that this recommendation should be amended to include 4 faculty and 4 professional slash support staff, so that each of the universities can be represented as each of the regions of the community colleges are being represented. That would also allow the faculty and university senates, which are the governing bodies at the universities, to vote and select those individuals. And I think that would increase representativity and also buy-in to the whole process. So that's a recommendation that I would like to make, namely that the number be increased from 3 to 4 for the university representatives in the 2 categories, faculty and professional slash support staff, to take into account the 4 different universities.
Mr. Chair, if I could, let me say that in determining the 37 members of the Search Advisory Committee, we had several principles that we wanted to keep in mind. One is that we're searching for a system president, not an institution president. 2 is that we're trying to keep the number manageable so that people can fully participate. And thirdly, that even if we go to Professor Blitz's suggestion, one might imagine that the 12 community colleges could say, well, every university has a person, why doesn't every community college have a person? Our best guess was that through the governing bodies of faculty and professional and support staff, they can figure out a way to get a representative group of their members. I will tell you, out of the 37 members of the advisory committee as we've presented it, 18 of them will be either faculty or professional and support staff. So it's really a 50-50 kind of arrangement, and our HR committee was supportive of that model, and I continue to support that.
May I make one comment? Actually, there's also a union representative from the AAUP. So if the CSU constituency could have that, make sure that that person is from the campus that's not recognized with another kind of a faculty member. So they really could have 4 representatives that way that are faculty representatives, and it could be every campus that is actually represented.
Any other comments or suggestions, questions? I'm just going to ask Regent Cohen, when you've looked at the process, clearly the way the institutions are set up, you have count them 12, count them 3, you know, either way, you could take a position, and then the 4 universities and 1 charter oak. Is there some consideration made for the balancing of the population of students within the system among the constituent units?
Well, there is a student representative, I believe, specifically called out in the list of, no, there's 1, 2, there are 2 student representatives, 3 student representatives specifically called out in the 37 member advisory committee, 1 from each of the constituency groups. I know in past searches, as the advisory committees have selected their own members, they have reached out to students and included them, including up through the interviews of semifinalists and finalists. I trust that as the governing bodies, the search committee as a whole gets together to figure this out, that students will be represented.
As you look at the student headcount, though, among the colleges and the universities, I think they're roughly equal in aggregate. So that the committee, the advisory committee structure would seem to reasonably reflect that, at least, even though, as Professor Bliss has pointed out, if you look at campuses individually, you can, that's a different way to view achieving balance.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay. So thank you for the work on that, which is clearly just a starting point for all this. But let me call a vote. Have you moved? We have a motion and a second.
Yes. There's a second, I believe.
Right. My Robert's rules elude me as usual. All right. Any other discussion? Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstaining? Okay, so we have a policy, and the policy calls for the search committee, the Regent Search Committee, to lead the charge on this effort. And I want to thank Regent Wright, who has extensive experience in talent and executive leadership, for joining me as the co-chair of the Regent Search Committee. I know you have an awful lot on your plate, but I'm really grateful to you for taking this on. And also to David Jimenez, Rich Balducci, and Joanne Ryan for joining the search committee. And also to you, Regent Cohen, in something of an ex officio capacity, being the designer and steward of the policy, and given your work on so many of our searches and your leadership of the HR and Admin Committee. Really would be valuable to have you at the table throughout the search committee's process. So thank you. And we'll convene that committee in the reasonably near future. Dr. Pritchard has already been immensely helpful in helping us coordinate this, as she has with the other searches. And I also want to just acknowledge that we'll be asking the balance of the regions to help us with the community college CEO searches, which are also extraordinarily important. So thank you to those of you who'll be helping us there. You have another item, Regent Cohen.
Yes, I do. It's an information item. And I just wanted to direct the board to please, please, please read the attached materials on the new Title IX protections against sexual misconduct. As you know, because we reported at the last meeting more extensively, the federal government, with 100 days notice, said to us, you need to change your policies. And what you see in the attachment is a totally thought out and comprehensive plan to do that, both at the universities and at the community colleges. I would say to you that this happened for 3 reasons. The biggest of the 3 reasons is Ernestine Weaver, who I first met when she came to CCSU, and they handed her all the policies of the 3 legacy institutions and said, here, I'm sure you can go through these and make sure that we have all our policies in line. And now arrives on her desk a 2,000-page set of regulations with the new rules. And Ernestine has yet done it again. And Andy Kripp, who of course knows a lot about a lot. And so he has been very helpful, especially in this area based on his past experience. And our Title IX coordinator, Angela Simone, who put together the materials that you see in there, has been overseeing this and eating and breathing it on a day-to-day basis. And without the 3 of them, this would not happen. We can be very proud that the CSCU system in that short amount of time is in total compliance. And I think for us, the bottom line is that at the heart of the board's operations is our commitment to a safe environment, both for our students and for our employees. And I'm very pleased that this has been able to happen. It also happened with strong input, not only from HR, but from the ASA committee led by Merle over the months as well. That's my report, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Really appreciate it. Okay. So that concludes our main meeting here. I don't have anything to report for the executive committee. We would like to have an executive session of this board. But before I call for a motion to move to the session, I need to state for the record that the board will move just to the executive session for purposes of discussing the appointment, employment, performance, or evaluation of a public officer or employee. No votes will be taken in the executive session. Additionally, there'll be no discussion, action, or votes by the board following executive session. As I said earlier, the only action following the session will be the declaration of adjournment. Therefore, allow me now to call for a motion to move to executive session for the purpose I have described.
It's Naomi, so moved.
It's a second.
Safe to say we have a second. Thank you. Okay, any discussion, questions about how that works? All right, thank you. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed or abstaining? Okay, so we'll move to executive session now. Let me ask the Associate Secretary to advise us on any logistics here.
So those invited into the executive session should stay. The rest of you may drop off, and we will end our recording. Thank you.
Thank you.